Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to St. John's. And this is the third in our 12-week Vision Forum series looking at how St. John's can make a difference in our community. And today we're especially privileged to have with us three community leaders who are very engaged from different perspectives and different backgrounds and on different issues in different ways, but they're all engaged on building healthy and holistic relationships in our community. Steve Hall has lived in Bethesda for 26 years and has had a 30-year publishing career. The last 12 of those years, he has been the co-founder, editor, and publisher of Bethesda Magazine and the online magazine Bethesda Beat. But in addition to putting us under the microscope from his perspective as the editor of the magazine, he's very active as a volunteer in the community. He serves on the board of the universities at Shady Grove, Bethesda Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also on the Community Foundation. The Community Foundation is the nonprofit that finances and evaluates local charities and nonprofits. Steve also helped found Community Profits Montgomery. Don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an initiative that promotes businesses that give back in their community. And he is co-founder of MentorPrize, which is an organization that matches up people who would like to be mentors with needs, with NGOs and nonprofits who need mentors. And it was in that capacity that he met our second speaker, Leslie Edelman. Leslie has had a very successful career as a corporate lawyer. In many respects, she represents Bethesda, lovely family, beautiful home, but Leslie told me that something was missing in that life, at least until the day that she met Steve Hall at a Community Foundation event where one of the mentees that he has worked with told her life story. And that story of that young woman that Steve helped in the mentoring relationship inspired her so much that she sought Steve out. Steve explained to her his idea to set up MentorPrize, which is an organization that matches mentors and mentees, and Leslie took it on, and today she's the president of MentorPrize. And barely 2 years after founding it, there's 100 people working as mentors with 16 partner organizations. So we look forward to hearing more about that, Leslie. C. Marie Taylor, well, for Marie, community service and working in the social services is both a passion and a profession. She is a 20-year professional working with nonprofits and NGOs doing community service work. And Marie got her start, actually, in a bit of a spiritual desert, as she told me. When she finished school, she went to work teaching computer science company contractors how to use the Excel spreadsheet. And that somehow was not speaking to her. But a savvy roommate suggested, why don't you go into the NGO world, into social services work? And even though Marie at that time didn't know much about what that was, she jumped right in and she started to work at a free clinic that helped provide services to HIV and AIDS people. And she never looked back. She went on. She was for many years the executive director of Interfaith Works, the executive director of the Community Foundation. And in 2015, she became the new executive director of Leadership Montgomery, which you may know is a group that trains business, community, government leaders in issues facing our county. And Marie is currently in the process of transforming that organization a bit into one that also helps build connections in community. So we have a lot we can learn today from these three very engaged leaders about how to build healthy, holistic relationships in community, where the problems are, more things that can be done. So please join me in welcoming our three-member panel today. Good morning.
Hello again.
So I would like to start with Steve, because I'm going to ask him to set the context for our discussion by describing an article that was published in the Bethesda Magazine in 2013, which kind of inspired the Vision Pillar team that was working on this pillar about building relationships. And it's an article that looks into the reasons of our discontent in this very educated, very wealthy, very healthy community. Why are we not happy when we're one of the wealthiest, healthiest, and most educated of the communities in the country? When I read that article, it honed right in on the issue of meaningful social interaction. So Steve, let me start with you.
First of all, thank you for organizing this, and thank you for inviting us. I think I can say safely we're thrilled to be here. We did this story 3 years ago, as Ann said, and the headline was, "We're healthy, wealthy, and wise, so why aren't we happy?" And we've now published 75 issues of Bethesda Magazine. We received more feedback about this story than any other one we've done. And I was a little concerned about it, what we were going to hear, but it was almost entirely people saying, you nailed it. And I started thinking about this story maybe 10 years ago, as I got to know the community more and more as editor and publisher of the magazine. And I talked to more and more people who seemed to have everything. They had beautiful homes, they had great cars, just everything, except there was something missing in their life. And that something missing came out, people wouldn't articulate it, but there seemed to be just an edge to them, an anger, a discontent somehow. And it really came together to me in talking to people who are in the service business in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Potomac. And they interact with people around here all the time. And one restaurateur in particular, who's in Bethesda, been here a long time, then opened a restaurant elsewhere. And he was struck by the difference in his customers from here and in their new locale. And I'm not going to say who it is. And the thing that struck him, that here people were demanding what he thought was unreasonable, they were impatient, and in their new location he finds the exact opposite, and it's not that many miles from here. So that led us to do this story of why here, where we seem to have everything, we're healthy, wealthy, and wise. Healthy, Montgomery County has one of the highest life expectancies of all 3,200 counties in this country. For a while, I think it was number 1. Now it's, I think, number 3. We're wealthy. Bethesda, every year when they do a survey, and at least in terms of household income, number 1 in the country, Chevy Chase, Potomac right behind it. And we're wise, or at least we're educated. I don't know if we're wise. And 57% of our readers who are typical of this community have advanced degrees, and 98% have undergraduate degrees. So again, we seem to have everything. So we looked into, if we seem to have everything but we're not happy, why? And one thing we found was a study, a national study done a few years ago that traced the correlation, the relationship between wealth and happiness. And nationally, up to about $75,000 a year, there absolutely is a correlation. And so when you think about it, in most places, not here, but in most places, $75,000 a year will get you a home. You'll be able to have a comfortable life and not have to worry about the basic necessities. But that study found there's absolutely no correlation at all beyond that, whether you make $750,000, $7.5 million, it doesn't matter. Wealth itself does not lead to happiness. But what we also found is that there's a huge cost to having everything. And that is, most families have 2 people working, difficult, demanding jobs. They may be rewarding jobs, but they're difficult and demanding. And the stresses that creates. And it all leads to, yes, we have so much, and yet at the same time, we're leading these lives, and not everyone, but so many people are leading these lives that they're really not happy in the end.
So let's talk a little bit about what it is that makes the difference in terms of having a happy life. It's not wealth, as you indicated. And Leslie, when we spoke, you talked about a New York Times article that made this same point and helped inspire you. And you're working in an area where you're promoting really intense and positive kinds of interactions. Can you tell us more?
Sure. So the article that I read years ago, was very similar to the Bethesda Magazine, but there was one fact in the article that really stuck with me, and it stuck with me for years, and it continues to stick with me. But it said that once you have obtained a certain level of wealth where your needs are met and you don't have to worry, the real benefit, the only benefit that having extra money has is your ability to give. It's your ability to be altruistic. It's the time it'll give you, the opportunities it gives you, and that is the only way that having that additional wealth brings extra happiness. And so for me, it had just always been, it just stuck in my mind. And so I can talk a little bit about how I sort of got into shifted, little paradigm shift for me. But about 2 years ago, it's almost 2 years to the date, I think it was November, I was at a breakfast hosted by a friend of mine. It was at her house, but it was hosted by the Community Foundation. And the topic was education and disadvantaged youth, and Marie was there. And so a woman got up and spoke, and she, a young woman, in many ways a fantastic story, a success story, but she has had a very, very difficult life. And she was telling us all of the different parts of that story. And what struck me is that she became most emotional when she started to talk about her mentor and how he had changed her life. And all the things that they do, and how it had allowed her to become the woman she wanted to be. And it was really, really a beautiful tribute. And it just turned out that her mentor was there that day, and her mentor is Steve Hull. And so many of you have probably read the article about his mentee as well that was recently published. So afterwards, I mean, my wheels were spinning, like all of the mentors in my life, and I had worked at Georgetown for a little while and started a mentoring program there, and I was just very enthusiastic. So at the end of the breakfast, I went and introduced myself to Nicole, the mentee, and thanked her for sharing her story, which is not an easy thing to do. And then I introduced myself to Steve, and I guess he could just sense that I was really enthusiastic about it. And he said, listen, I've had this idea I've been thinking about, let's get together. We had never met before. So fast forward several weeks, we finally find a time on our schedules to meet. And by the way, I had stopped about 1 month earlier to this breakfast. I'd stopped practicing law. I had tried it in every which way. I had tried to use that degree to the nth degree, and really never loved it. It was never my passion. And so we get together. So I probably had a little more time than he did then. So we get together, and he says, I have this idea of starting, and you would call it like a mentor corps, where we would go out and we would recruit mentors and then try to place them with existing programs. And so Steve honestly said, I have 0 time to do this. He said, so if you're interested, run with it. And he's been very involved throughout, and as we actually, one of our first meetings was circling back with Marie at the Community Foundation. And so from there, really launched this organization, MentorPrize. So that's been, the first year we spent a lot of time building our partnership base. So we have 16 currently 16 partner organizations. So to be clear, we don't recruit, we don't have our own mentoring program, but we are out there supporting amazing programs that exist, whether they're supporting foster kids, teen parents, high schoolers who are, first generation, just trying to figure things out. I mean, it runs the gamut with their programs all over the DC area. And so that was really the first year, was sort of building up. And now we're out in the community engaging people. So we're in corporations, we come to religious institutions, we're at the farmer's market. We are everywhere we can possibly be to talk about the benefits of mentoring. And the reason that I feel so passionate about it, and I've dedicated 2 years of my life and 0 income, and in fact putting money in, and we have a board of 10 people who are doing the same thing, is because our communities, whether it's local, on a national level, or internationally, I feel have become very disconnected. We have, with technology, with everything going on in this world, we are just not connecting anymore. And what I believe is that when you connect with someone, when you mentor someone, you take their story home with you, right? Their story becomes part of your story, and it changes the lens in which you view the world, and it changes who you are. And for me, I think it is one of the most critical elements to changing sort of this negative path that we've gotten ourselves on. And so, to me, I think connection is really what makes the difference and will change things.
Thank you, and it's connection around a common purpose. And since this is a theme that I know Marie is working on in her new position at Leadership Montgomery, maybe I'll turn to you now. Leadership Montgomery is well known for training leaders, and what intrigued me about what you're doing is you're bringing those leaders more directly into contact with the public around specific problems and issues that they need to know more about from the very people who are experiencing them. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So one of the things that I have realized for the last 20 plus years is that volunteering, and when you focus on spending time with other folks, you learn a lot more and you feel much more engaged and much more connected. And so since I had that background, I know that's one way to get people to really focus outside of themselves. In every role I've had, I've tried to bring that together, because that's where people really get connected and do more for their own communities and a larger community. So with my new role at Leadership Montgomery. One of the things that we're doing right now are breaking down some of the bubbles from the leadership programs, because they're a little insulated, where people are really fascinated within their Leadership Montgomery group, and they're really focused on that group that they came in through for the program. So we have this amazing cadre of leaders who could be doing more for the community. So one of the things that we're doing right now, we just finished a strategic plan, and we are working to find strategic partners where we're going to focus on some of these issues and bring some of the amazing talent from Leadership Montgomery back out to the community focused on specific problems.
I like your example about gleaning. Maybe you could talk about that one.
About what? I'm sorry.
Gleaning?
Oh, yes. So we tried one of our first community service projects in July, the hottest day of the year. But we had about 100 different Leadership Montgomery folks and their families actually come around to 6 different locations in Montgomery County, and we were focusing on hunger in Montgomery County. So I had these very important people on their hands and knees gleaning and picking up vegetables and learning about hunger here in Montgomery County. So it was a way to take off their important hat, learn about Montgomery County, and talk to other people just while we're literally picking up vegetables out of a field.
Right. It's different than learning about it, in a classroom or reading about it in a book.
It makes you much more connected to the issue to think that these green beans are going to go on someone's plate who's hungry in Montgomery County, instead of me standing here and telling you, there's someone hungry in Montgomery County, right? So it's much more impactful to actually help provide the food on the plate. And so that's part of the new mission and role for Leadership Montgomery.
Great. Well, since you mentioned bubbles and the fact that someone's hungry in Montgomery County, and we've also talked about the importance of connection, there's 2 things I'd like to probe a little further. One, Steve, has to do with this concept of the bubble, the golden bubble we live in, the bubble that Marie mentioned. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, that's no secret that we live inside this bubble. It's one heck of a bubble to live in, but it's a bubble nevertheless. Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Potomac, for the most part, where life is great. But the thing that strikes me, and this is becoming more apparent every day, is just outside our bubble, just 5 miles from here, there are people leading very difficult lives. And that number is growing. The demographic data in the county is shifting significantly, and these issues are only going to multiply. And there's hunger, there's homelessness, but the most fundamental issues are that the county is now majority minority. It is a wonderfully diverse place, and that is by far, I believe, a plus for our county. But a lot of the people who are coming here face a lot of challenges. They don't have education, they don't have much income, they don't speak the language, and this is all creating challenges. And as a result, people are leading very difficult lives just miles from here. Several years ago, we did another cover story, and it was called The Great Divide. And it was meant to, our readers largely live inside the bubble, but it was meant to bring attention to the fact that just miles from here, in fact, people have no idea for the most part what's going on. And the Great Divide largely is, if you think of it in real terms, is I-270. There's some exceptions to it. But largely, people lead a lot of the areas of poverty and difficulty are in the East County, and then to the west, people tend to be doing a little better.
So your article and your comments all point to the importance of connection, human connection, as really important to happiness. And also you pointed in your comments to the great needs that are out there. Your article said that the reason we're not happy is we lack meaningful social interactions in a place where they're so needed. Why? Why aren't we having, and I applaud the work you're doing because you're doing the good work, but why more broadly don't we have those meaningful social interactions? Where is the hidden problem?
So I think part of the problem is because we go to work, we go to our gym, we go to our church or synagogue, and we don't go anywhere else. We invite people from our gym, from our church, from our synagogue into our homes. We don't invite other people into our space, right? So part of Leadership Montgomery, we purposely put people who you would never meet into your space, and we force them to spend time with each other, to break down all those barriers. You think about it, you only go to those 3 places and you don't find other people. Often I'm the only brown person in the room. So I have to bring other brown people into the room so that they can see that we actually have the same needs, the same wants, the same frustrations. We put on our shoes the same way, right? There's only a few other differences.
Leslie?
I think there's also a bit of a fear element here. We talked about this a little bit. I am a big fan of Brene Brown and the power of vulnerability and all of and her work. And I think that we think that we're living these very big, full lives because we have big jobs or we're wealthy or what have you. But the truth is, I think that people are afraid to be vulnerable. They are afraid to cross the line and to the Great Divide and recognize what is out there, and really to see people the way they are, and to recognize that this is happening to people who are just like us. I mean, we are all the same. We are made up of the same parts, and I think that there's a big fear element, and I think, I think life is much more rich when you make yourself vulnerable and you connect with people and you understand who they are. And so I think we're all safe in our little bubble.
So how do you get people, the mentors, to come out of their bubble? You mentioned there's kind of a fear threshold that a mentor has to leap over in establishing that relationship.
Right. Well, I think the first step, I think when people sort of think about it and step back and recognize, I mean, all of you here are obviously interested in the topic and wanting to find something more fulfilling. I mean, all of us can always find something more fulfilling, right? And so I think that first sort of recognizing that, and the truth is what we tell people all the time with mentoring, and people get nervous about it, and what are we gonna do, and what are we gonna talk about? But 99% of it is just showing up. Like, that is all. And all of us, which is sort of a problem that we come up across, are real overachievers. So, I had my mentee and I wanted to get her the scholarship and the good grades and into this, and I'm like, what? How are we gonna, I had these goals in mind, but the truth is, she just wanted to send me a copy of her financial aid package when she got it and was excited. It's just another person that cares about you and that is there. And so that is really a hard thing that we find, and how can mentoring be fulfilling, because we see it as another thing we have to achieve. But the truth is, these are people just to have one other advocate who cares about you, who's there to share things with. That's it. I mean, some of these kids, they have been rejected again and again and again. So just showing up is like a home run to them. So it's really, it's.
Thank you so much. And Steve, can you give us your sense of why do we not have these meaningful social interactions?
Well,
what are the impediments?
I think for the most part, and I know a lot of people serve on a lot of boards, and as do I, and I find it satisfying and rewarding, and I'm glad I do it. But for the most part, when you're on a board, you are dealing with people just like yourself, and you're rarely interacting with the people you want to help. And also, a lot of people I know in this room, I'm sure, give away a fair amount of money, and that is satisfying. Our company gives away a lot of money, and it's satisfying. I love writing those checks at the end of the year. But again, you're doing it from afar. And I think the most it took my interaction and my relationship with Nicole Land, my first mentee, to change my whole perspective on what leading a meaningful life really is. And sorry, whenever I talk about her, these two know well, I tend to get pretty emotional. Having that one-on-one connection just changes everything. It puts everything into perspective. And I think you forwarded the story about Nicole, but I'll just tell very quickly. Nicole was a student at universities at Shady Grove, a scholarship student. I was fortunate enough to become her mentee. She had led an extraordinarily difficult life, one of 9 children. Both parents had drug issues. They lived in a two-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment. The poverty, lots of run-ins with the police, not Nicole, and it was just an extraordinarily difficult life. And yet she's optimistic and put her way through school. Took her 8 years of working, dropping out of Montgomery College because she couldn't afford it, until she graduated from Montgomery College, and then got a scholarship that changed her life to USG. She now has a great job. Her goal in life, in our first meeting I said, tell me what your goals are. And her first one I just loved. After living her entire life, she was 28 at the time, with a minimum of 10 other people in this apartment, she said, to get my own apartment.
Yeah, right.
And her second goal, after having such troubles, she said, I want to give back. I want to work for a nonprofit. And she now is happily ensconced in her own apartment. I talked to her the other night, and her first job was for Interfaith Works. And she's now working for Montgomery College, where she graduated. She said very kindly when we met, when we were at the event with Leslie and Marie, that I had inspired her. That may have happened. I hope I did a little bit. What she did was inspire me. She touched me. And to this day, no matter how badly things are going, but you got to really put these things in perspective. And I think that's what mentoring people and working with people one-on-one has done so much for me, is put my little troubles in so much perspective. And now every year I get a new mentee at the universities at Shady Grove. I'm meeting my new mentee on Thursday night. I can't wait. And it has really changed me in another way, in that I look at people I meet in a very different way. And especially the people routine in my life. When I say routine, meaning I see them all the time. The trainer in my gym, who is Serbian and Serbian American. She went to Serbia, was back in Serbia, was married, had a child, and then came here because she wanted her family to have a better life. She's been without them for a year, thought she was going to get a visa for them this month, and now she told me yesterday as she sobbed that it's going to be another year. There's every person you talk to, it seems, who aren't living inside these bubbles, that don't live inside this bubble, seem to have stories like that. And when I say we can help them, I don't want to sound, I don't mean it like we have so much to give. It's mostly we can help them, as you said, by listening and being there and showing up.
Connecting, being human, that's right. I want to give Marie a minute to talk about your idea about uniting people around a common purpose, because I thought that was really innovative, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience.
Sure, but I just want to add on to what Steve said. So one of the easiest things you could actually do is take one extra second and see who is serving your coffee, who is behind you at the door. There are a million times, I have a giant job, and hundreds of people know me. But when I am in my regular, everyday, going to the grocery store, whatever, no one ever sees me, ever, except when I'm on the stage being Marie, the president of Leadership Montgomery. So if you want to just take 1 minute and see someone and actually ask them, how are you, and mean it, that is how you can build community right there. Take 2 seconds and say, how are you? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
I had to add on to what Steve was saying.
But you were talking about trying in the Leadership Montgomery context to bring people together outside of their bubbles around common purposes.
Correct. So we're taking a big, bold leap at Leadership Montgomery. We did a strategic plan this last year, and we have a new initiative called Leadership in Action. And so Leadership in Action is literally that. So we're going to work with 5 different partners and actually connect our graduates to some of the big issues in Montgomery County. So I'll give you an example. We have a youth program it's nice, it's lovely, it does a few things. It's not changing the trajectory of some children here in Montgomery County. And that's not necessarily our role. However, I think our leadership grads could actually do more. So what we're looking at doing next year is actually having a partnership with the nonprofit called Urban Alliance. And we're going to have an education program with this nonprofit. And then our graduates will actually have internships for 6 or 8 weeks with some of these kids to help them see the possibilities and to see the future, and to invite someone from 2 different bubbles to actually work together. So that's a concrete example of something that we're going to try to do.
Thank you so much. I'm going to borrow your microphone and give it to John Ross. And we'd like to go now to questions from the audience. And if you'd like to speak, John will bring you the microphone. Questions? Meredith.
Morning. Is this on? Okay, I've got a question for Marie. I'm Leadership Montgomery 2004, and I was wondering what your 5 strategic partners what groups you've identified to work with.
So that's a great question. Can everyone hear me?
There.
All right. No, other one. I have a great theater voice. Okay, so You have to speak from your diaphragm. So we have just started working on that right now. We've identified education as one, of course, hunger. So we're actually going to start to do a bunch of community forums this year to decide the other 3 partners and issues. So if you have thoughts, Mary, you can come tell me.
Thanks, Meredith. Yes.
Hi, Steve.
Hello there.
My kids go to school on the edge of the bubble. Half the population is Chevy Chase and half is not Chevy Chase. I mean, mostly kids from Silver Spring, a lot of immigrant kids. But we're part of the BCC cluster. We're the diversity in it. And I've been following a lot of the discussions around, you probably know this because there's new middle school opening up and they want to balance the diversity. And my thoughts is it's been great for me to be exposed to this different outside the bubble. I have my kids' friends' parents work at some of the restaurants in Bethesda. Has certainly made me see the people there in a different light, as you said. But when I've looked online and a lot of the discussion revolving around the schools and getting them to be more diverse, a lot of people, not everyone, in the Bethesda area are very much against it. They see busing, they see kids who are lowering the standards of the schools, of bringing down their kids. Do you have any thoughts on how to get around that? How to get people to embrace it and to see that there's value in their kids going to school with kids who are not like them and from very different backgrounds?
That's a great question. Thank you. Who wants to go first?
I would just say I think the issues that raises are partly the fear and partly the very thing we talked about in our cover story is that people, they're so ambitious and they're so ambitious for their kids that all they see is value in going to what they say are the best schools that are going to have the best programs that are going to get them into the best colleges. We were fortunate in that my 4 kids went to BCC as well. And the diversity there, it's about 40% minority, a terrific school, but about 40% minority. I think it exposed my kids to different ways of life and people living different lives that I'm not sure you can put a value on, but I think as they get older, they're now more able to articulate the value of it. And I certainly, and my wife certainly saw from the start the value of it. I think it is just overcoming those fears and trying to get people, not an easy thing to do, trying to get people to see the bigger picture, and it's not just SAT scores and where they're going to go to school.
And I think the other part of it is that the real goal, and I have a 15-year-old, and we're sort of starting in that whole college stage, and I keep trying to remind myself that this is part of her ride too. Like high school, 10th grade, that's part of her ride. And so when we keep focusing on what's next, I think that becomes really problematic. And I think that the other thing to keep in mind is, what is your goal for your child? Yes, you'd want them to be successful and be comfortable, but I think if people start to realize that this issue of connection and diversity and hearing different perspectives and being more enriched by it, if that's part of your mission for your child, I mean, it's hard for someone to refute that. Don't you want your child to feel connected? Don't you want your child to hear different viewpoints? Don't you want them to be challenged on their viewpoints? Don't you think that will make them a stronger advocate and better person? So I think it's sort of changing the way people view success and more of a focus also on happiness and contentment.
Right. It's changing how people view success, and then you have to translate it from the individual to somehow the school board level or the PTA level. That's, I think, what you're getting at, right, Marie? Please.
Well, and I will also ask them to challenge the assumption that just because more brown kids are going to come to the school, that the test scores are going to lower. Why are they automatically going to lower? So in a peaceful way, I would try to challenge, try to push back, or as my friend calls, clip back. Instead of pushing, clip back. And I would also, can you do some forums around it? Can you have them come in and say, if you're worried about the test scores, let's have a group sign up for studying groups. Let's have a group to sign up for math classes or whatever you think is going to happen to lower it. And let's come up with some solutions instead of focusing on what you think is a problem.
Steve had a comment, too.
I know when my kids were in middle school, and the big thing, as I'm sure many of you know, in middle school is the kids want to hang out in Bethesda on a Friday and Saturday night. And that was like the first time your kids would be gone, and as a couple you actually got some free time to go out for dinner, and then you'd pick them up. But I was talking to other parents about why is it always in Bethesda, and why don't we ever bring them to Silver Spring, where it's happening and it's fun, and it's just, liberal Bethesda is only liberal in some ways. And people looked at me like I was crazy that I would suggest that we actually drop our kids off in Silver Spring. Yes, yes.
I live in Silver Spring, by the way.
Yes.
John Terry has a question, since he lives in Silver Spring.
So from a religious standpoint, and we talk about this all the time at church, we believe that, as Jesus taught us, that there is poverty, but the poverty that Christ talked about is very different than the ones that we might see in our world today as poverty. So like for Jesus, he said that the real poverty is not the prostitutes and the sinners, and like we read in the Gospels, but it was where the spiritual pretense was, and it was where the real wealth was. And there are all kinds of parables that Jesus gives that talks about the real sad spiritual poverty. And usually it's not the obvious ones that we look at, right, where there's hunger and stuff. It's that deeper poverty that is almost much more damaging and destroying of a person's heart and soul. So there's a difference between that kind of bodily poverty and spiritual poverty. And we had the Chief Manger come a couple of weeks ago. It was an amazing thing to have him here. But there's a lot of focus on where poverty is, and none of it had to do with Bethesda Chevy Chase, right? And where all the problems are happening, where the police are spending much of their time, is not here. And so there could have been this misconception that, oh, we're all fine, we're doing great here in Bethesda Chevy Chase. But what we're hearing here today, which for some of us, maybe it's a kind of a new angle. For others, like myself, which kind of catalyzed this whole thing, is we said, we want to find out what rich people struggle with. And we are in Bethesda Chevy Chase, so this is our community. We're not from the outside looking in. We care about this community. And what we are trying to really connect with is this real poverty that we all are a part of. So how can we, I guess my real question here is, is there a way to not just have the hope taking place on the sides with people who are willing to join mentorship programs, but is there a more systemic way that we as a church community can be involved in helping infuse a kind of a different mindset in Bethesda Chevy Chase, where people, whether they see it coming or not, we start to find a change that's happening. And I don't know what that is, and that's what we're here to discover. But is there some subversive way that we can begin to shift things? So, big question. Anyway, I don't know if someone has an answer for it, maybe not, but maybe we can start discussing that as well.
You want to go first?
You go first.
Sure. Why not have community dinners and have some other congregations bring some of their folks and sit down and break bread together and have some topics that you've pre-planned to talk about in small groups at tables. There's one simple suggestion.
Steve? Leslie?
Well, I think it's something Marie talked about before, but it is amazing when you're just nice to someone. I think about it, recently I was at the pharmacist. I love my pharmacists. And I thought, you know what, if this were a couple years ago, I'd always be annoyed with them, and they never have it ready. And, well, and then I started really just talking with them. They're just lovely. And now I love to go to the pharmacy. When they see me, they're happy to see me. And it's kind of this weird, everyone hates the pharmacy, right? I mean, everyone's in line, and it's taking too long, and you have to stand back and wait your turn, and it's not ready. And I found these little, just being nicer then people are nicer, and you feel better. I'm like, I just made the pharmacist happy today, and everyone's always yelling at her. And so it's just these, I think the little things, I think, can really start to shift things if you just are conscious of it. And like, you know, as Steve was saying, like at these restaurants and always being angry and entitled and all of that, just sort of shifting it a bit. I think that has a ripple effect.
So I think that is the most important question, and I don't have an answer, but I would love to be part with you of trying to find an answer, because I greatly admire what you're doing here. This is really important work, and yet it is confined to this group here. And the question is, how do we spread the word? How do we get so many more people asking these questions, attending events like this? And it's not going to be easy, but I think that is the fundamental question. I just wanted, my last comment, just come back to something Leslie was talking about, is just individually, and this just spreads, is the importance of individual connection above all else. It doesn't, I mean, I encourage you to mentor, I encourage you to talk to Leslie, it is so rewarding, but you can have individual interactions, you know, beyond mentoring that are equally as rewarding. I've really tried to focus the last few years, on the people in my life day to day, and I'm just going to tell one quick story. And that is the woman who cleans our office. She is from El Salvador, came over about 7 years ago by herself, knew no one here because she wanted a better life for her then 7-year-old daughter. And she knew she was going to have to wait 7 years, roughly, maybe a little more, for them to be together again. And she's minimum wage jobs. You know, she, by all standards compared to what we all have, leads a very difficult life. And I've really gotten to know her. And now her daughter doesn't want to come. It's incredibly sad. And yet she's also very upbeat and optimistic. But she couldn't afford to have her daughter come here. Yet she hadn't seen her daughter in years. And so I did just the world's simplest thing. I said, we'll fly her here. And it wasn't that expensive. It was, you know, it was like millions of dollars for her, and it was nothing for me. And that little interaction changed her life in pretty significant ways and made her life more meaningful. And again, it was almost nothing for me, but it was so satisfying. Yeah. And one last thing about how you can change lives. We have a story in our current issue about a gentleman in Chevy Chase who 20 years ago started going every day to the Einstein Bagels near his house and started to form relationships with the employees there who are from around the world, Morocco and other places. And he became very important in their lives, and equally as importantly, they became very important in his life. And he has now traveled with them. He's traveled to meet their families all over the world. He has given back in incredibly significant ways. And as I said, changed their lives, and in the process, changed his life. And when you're done here, I encourage you to say hello to John Spencer, who we wrote about right there.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, John. I'm glad that Steve mentioned it, or I was going to ask you to tell your story. It was terrific. Julia has a question.
Yes. A great proportion of our county lives in unincorporated areas where we have no town councils, no town hall meetings, no smaller political infrastructure. And I'm wondering if, from your perspective, you see any differences between relationships in unincorporated areas and incorporated areas.
Great question.
Absolutely. So I don't know. In the Washington Post, several times there was an article about an area in Potomac that needed a bus line, a historically black neighborhood that needed a bus line, and they fought for like 45 years to get a bus line. They just got the bus line like 2 days ago. Absolutely, there are differences, but it makes no sense. Absolutely, there are differences, and it shouldn't be because they're not incorporated that we aren't supporting that area and that group to help them. 45 years is Montgomery County. How much is a bus line? Come on, let me stop there. Don't get me started on the bus line.
Steve or Leslie, no? I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Yes, please, John. Do you?
So I think one of the things that strikes me is I'm Mexican, and I have 2 Mexican kids. And so I think it's really important that we also think of what's in our community first, in our church. Who comes from other countries? What can we learn? I'm a little bit in the hot seat because we have a candidate for presidency that mentions my country almost every day. And, but I have 2 kids, and for them, they don't look your typical Latinos. They look like me. But I am 4 generations on every side of Mexicans. So it's also, I think, very important to not think only, well, the racial and how does that work? Because even in our community here, I'm sure that if everybody will greet me, would never think that I'm from Mexico. So what happens to my kids is they hear things of, oh, Mexicans are going to pay for the wall, which, by the way, my son is not given any money to, because he has other plans for his Lego set and other things he wants to do. But when the very big word that he said about what Mexicans are, which I refuse to repeat, that's a conversation I had to have with my kids. But it was not because I said it to him, or it's a conversation that happened in the family. It's something he learned in the bus. Somebody said, this man is saying that Mexicans equal that. So it's not just my kids that need that conversation. It's every single other kid that listened to that comment. So, we talked about how would I deal with it. And in our little walk, honestly, it was a very hard thing for me not to say that man is equal that. Because then I will become him. And that's the least thing I want to do. But so we talk about generalizations. That's the only thing that crossed to my mind and said, every time, what does everybody tell mommy when they say that I'm from Mexico? Oh, really? You're from Mexico? I'm not green. I never felt green in my country. My mother looks like me. My grandmother, the mother of my mother, is very dark skinned. So I think that there is even stories within our community to start connecting. And in that, it will make us a stronger, church, and therefore a stronger way of interacting with a larger community. But I wanted to say that because I think it's really easy to think, well, exterior. And honestly, I think if a lot of people will know, oh, who are the Latinos in our community? They are in the hot seat right now. Can we talk to them? And yes, I don't have the same needs. I am not an illegal alien. I married an American. That's how I became a citizen. My kids have dual nationalities. Of course, their place in the world is different, but they are Mexican in their heart. And somebody saying that to them would obviously our conversation is beneficial, but everybody will benefit from that conversation. Not just my kids that are Mexican or on the receiving line. The kid that just said that will be very important to have that conversation. Well, how do we react when somebody calls another person that?
And how do we make these connections?
How do we make that connection?
Exactly.
So, I said to him, well, maybe next time you talk to this kid about it, and you say, all generalization has their exceptions. So be aware when you hear everyone's equal something, that's probably not true. Because every generalization, and my mother can tell you, she is blonde and has green eyes and doesn't look like a Latino like I do. But so, versus the last forum, I think that's really important just to keep in mind.
You're making such an important point, and it's the point we've heard through this entire forum today, the importance of connection. Whether it's just on a one-to-one level every day, being nice, connecting, being kind with individuals, working with groups, getting out of the bubble, looking at our own spiritual poverty, I think we might say, in terms of understanding the importance of connection. So thank you for pointing that out to us. Thank you for the good ideas you've given us. And now I hope everyone in the audience will take a minute to write down on that paper that was on your chair what you heard, where you see needs, what ideas you have after this great discussion. Thank you so much.